At 02:35 hours, on a cold October morning, a single Ukrainian long-range drone sliced through the mist-covered skies above Sumy Oblast, heading deep into Russian territory. Its destination, the Kovrov Defense Industrial Complex, one of Russia's largest weapon manufacturing hubs, responsible for producing guided artillery shells, tank optics, and cruise missile components. The factory's output powered much of Russia's modern battlefield. Every day, it produced enough munitions to sustain an entire front line. And for months, Ukrainian intelligence had watched it with growing alarm. Tonight, everything would change. That drone, barely 6 meters long, built in a secret Ukrainian workshop and carrying a 25-kilogram thermobaric warhead, was on a one-way mission to cripple Russia's arms production. Just 90 kilometers into its flight, Russian early warning radars detected something unusual. And within minutes, the world's most heavily defended airspace would erupt into chaos. What happened next would shock Russia's military command and prove that even their strongest defenses could be turned useless by a machine that couldn't hear them. Colonel Pavel Denisov, commander of Russia's Central Defense Network, had no reason to worry that night. His sector protected by overlapping systems, S-400 Triumph batteries, Pantsir S-2 platforms, and Repellent-1 anti-drone jammers. The Kovrov region was considered untouchable, guarded by 10 radar stations and 4 electronic warfare vehicles. Every approach route had been mapped, monitored, and secured. But while Denisov's radar operators watched the skies for cruise missiles or fighter jets, they ignored the threat skimming just 150 meters above the ground. The intruder wasn't a jet. It wasn't even remotely large. It was a Ukrainian AN-191 Spectre drone, modified with stealth composite plating and visual terrain navigation software that let it see the Earth the way a human pilot would. It carried no radio transmitter, no GPS receiver, no control antenna. It was completely deaf, and that made it invincible. For 2 months, Ukrainian engineers in Dnipro had worked on this drone, teaching it to recognize roads, rivers, and rail lines, training its onboard AI to match every bend, every light pattern, every landmark. The mission: infiltrate 900 kilometers of Russian airspace, fly autonomously, and strike a single warehouse inside the Kovrov complex, the Artillery Assembly Building 14, which stored over 3,000 high-explosive warheads ready for delivery to the front. The cost? Just $42,000. The potential damage? More than $600 million. 2:46 hours, the Spectre crossed the Russian border near Bryansk. Its radar cross-section measured only 0.4 square meters, roughly equivalent to a small bird. The first Russian radar that could have detected it, a Kosta 2E2, was located just 12 kilometers north, but the drone flew at an altitude so low that terrain clutter completely masked it. Inside the Russian command bunker, a radar operator saw a flicker on his screen. A weak echo, slow-moving, irregular. He marked it as atmospheric noise. The drone continued east, hugging the tree line. Every 30 seconds, its cameras took photos of the terrain ahead, matching them against its internal database. The AI adjusted altitude using a barometric pressure sensor, accurate to within 1 meter. Meanwhile, Ukrainian signal intercept units monitored Russian airwaves. At 02:58, chatter increased. A radar station near Suzdal reported an unidentified low-speed contact, the first hint that something was wrong. Denisov ordered Pole 21 jamming systems activated. Each tower emitted 1,000 watts of interference, flooding the air with electronic noise across GPS frequencies. But the Spectre didn't need GPS. It wasn't listening. It followed the M7 highway, then veered north at the Klyazma River, navigating perfectly despite total radio silence. 3:14, Russia deployed its first interceptor, a Mi-28 Night Hunter helicopter armed with 30mm cannons and Igla-V missiles. The pilots were told to expect a small, slow target, possibly a reconnaissance drone. They scanned with night vision, radar, and heat sensors. Nothing. The Spectre's small electric engine emitted almost no heat signature, running at just 45 degrees Celsius, barely above the surrounding air. The helicopter crew circled for 12 minutes, saw nothing, and returned to base. Meanwhile, the Spectre pressed on. It was now only 120 kilometers from Kovrov. At Or 325, the S-400's 92N6E Gravestone radar detected something faint at 110 kilometers range. Its operator zoomed in, recalibrating filters to isolate small targets. The signal disappeared again, lost in ground clutter. The system's algorithms weren't designed for targets flying below 100 meters, and at 93 meters altitude, the drone remained completely invisible to Russia's $2 billion missile network. Colonel Denisov grew impatient. He ordered Krasika 4 electronic warfare trucks to perform a barrage sweep, generating electromagnetic interference across every known drone control frequency, from 300 MHz to 6 GHz. At Or 329, those powerful transmitters unleashed 500 watts per megahertz, enough to knock out commercial communications across an entire city. But again, the drone wasn't listening. It had no receivers left to jam. At Or 333, the Spectre passed over a small village called Sudogda. Below, 2 Russian soldiers smoking outside a checkpoint heard a faint buzzing overhead. They looked up, saw nothing in the darkness. By the time they raised the alarm, the drone was already 20 kilometers ahead. At Or 338, Kovrov's radar grid finally picked up the intruder, 60 kilometers out, flying straight and level at 180 kilometers per hour. Within seconds, the base went into full alert. The Pantsir S-2 air defense units switched to automatic engagement. Their twin 30mm autocannons spun up, and the first pair of 57 E-6 missiles launched. The missiles locked onto radar reflections and streaked into the sky, closing the gap in seconds. But the drone, flying barely 40 meters above the ground, ducked under a ridge just as the missile's seekers lost contact. Both detonated harmlessly in midair. The explosion triggered secondary radar alarms, confusing the Pantsir's targeting system. To its computer, the debris looked like multiple new threats. By the time the operators realized what had happened, the drone was 25 kilometers from target. Denisov ordered direct visual confirmation. Spotlights swept across the perimeter, illuminating the mist. Finally, one operator caught sight of it. A gray shadow skimming across the tree line, its small navigation light glowing red. "Engage! Engage!" The Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns opened fire, pouring 2,000 rounds per minute into the night. Tracers streaked overhead like fiery ropes. The Spectre's camera recorded every second. Flashes of orange light, streaks of fire, the roar of gunfire growing louder. One bullet grazed its right wing, ripping a small hole. It kept flying. At Or 347, just 6 kilometers from the factory, Russia activated its last line of defense, the Repellent 1 anti-drone system. Its operator, confident, unleashed 500 watts of focused jamming through a directional antenna, cycling through every possible drone frequency, from Turkish to NATO standards. Nothing. The drone didn't react. It simply continued forward. That's when they realized the truth. There was nothing left to jam. The drone's control modules weren't just offline. They were physically removed. There was no radio link, no GPS receiver, no signal to spoof. It was a weapon that couldn't be interrupted. Denisov shouted into the radio, "Deploy Intercept Net." Soldiers fired anti-drone mesh, steel cables designed to entangle quadcopters. The Spectre tore straight through it, shredding the net apart. Range to target, 1.4 kilometers. At Oro 349 Tuat 12, the drone's optical system recognized its final waypoint, the Kovrov Assembly Hall. Inside that building, over 3,000 artillery shells, 200 missile engines, and 7 Iskander guidance modules were stored under one roof. The drone climbed sharply to 260 meters, adjusted its heading by 11 degrees, and entered a terminal dive. At 3:49:31, it hit. The thermobaric warhead detonated on contact, releasing a shockwave of over 250 psi inside the warehouse. The explosion triggered a chain reaction. Rows of artillery shells ignited like fireworks. Missile fuel burned at 3,000 degrees Celsius, melting through steel rafters. Within 6 seconds, the entire building collapsed inward. Pressure sensors on nearby structures spiked to 3 atmospheres, enough to rupture windows 8 kilometers away. At Oro 350.14, a second explosion followed. The stored Iskander booster propellants went off simultaneously, creating a fireball 400 meters high. Security cameras at the nearby Kovrov rail terminal captured the blast, a mushroom cloud rising from the horizon, bright enough to light the clouds from below. Power grids across the district flickered and died. The shockwave toppled communication towers and blew open every door in a 2-kilometer radius. Flames engulfed the complex for hours. The entire Kovrov defense plant, a facility worth $1.3 billion, was annihilated in less than 2 minutes. When dawn arrived, satellite images told the story. Where the weapons factory once stood, there was only a blackened crater, hundreds of meters wide. Twisted steel beams jutted from the ashes like bones. Russian firefighters battled the inferno for nearly 8 hours, but by then, nothing remained. Initial assessments confirmed catastrophic losses. 3,000 artillery shells destroyed. 200 missile engines melted. 7 Iskander components gone. Entire production lines for tank optics and guidance chips reduced to rubble. Russia's arms output from that region fell by 45% in a single day. The strike didn't just destroy equipment, it shattered morale. Russian media stayed silent for 12 hours, then quietly reported a fire caused by an electrical fault. But satellite photos from NASA's FIRM system told the truth, a thermal signature equivalent to 2,000 tons of TNT. The cost to Ukraine? $42,000. The cost to Russia? Over $1.3 billion and 6 months of lost production capacity. In a war where precision beats power, this single drone proved something terrifying. A silent machine built in a garage could do what missiles, armies, and sanctions couldn't. Bring a superpower's war industry to its knees. So, what do you think? Was this the most brilliant strike of the war, or just the beginning of a new era in autonomous warfare? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true battlefield missions, decoded, analyzed, and brought to life.